What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Online Therapist channel. My name is Eddie. We're back in studio. We were in South America having a little bit of vacation, but we're back. And today's video is titled, Do I Have Trauma? Did you know nearly 20% of adults in the United States are experiencing mental illness? That's 50 million people. Now, the question is, out of those 50 million people, how many of them are experiencing some sort of trauma? And are you one of those individuals? Today, we're going to talk about how we can look at some of our life experiences and maybe determine if they're traumatic and maybe seek out help. Now, I will say, if you are experiencing some sort of disturbing event or issue, please seek out help. There is a 1-800 number there in the description box if you need immediate attention. Let's define trauma just to kind of have a general definition here for this, okay? So trauma can be defined as emotional response to a distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual to cope. It's important to note that trauma is subjective, and meaning that what may be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you. And that's important to make that distinction. So how do you know you have trauma? All right, we all have that question in our mind, especially after the pandemic. Well, one of the things that I do with my clients is I ask them a question. It's a very simple question, and I'm going to pose it to you. When you remember a disturbing event in your life, do you remember it to be painful? Something that you went through, do you remember it to be painful? Or do you remember it and it still feels painful emotionally? Those are two different questions. Now I'm going to repeat it again so you don't miss it. When you recall a disturbing and emotional challenging memory, do you remember it to be painful or does it still feel painful? Now, if you don't get that, pause it, think about it, and you'll find the answer. Now, if you remember it and it feels painful, it triggers an emotional response that it feels like it happened yesterday feeling, then you might have a disturbing or traumatic memory in you. And the challenge is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to seek help? Are you going to try to learn from it? Are you going to seek professional help? Now, I believe there's only two things you can do with trauma. You're going to go to a place where you feel fearful and you become victimized. I don't believe there's any gray area from what I can see, and even in my own life. I don't see any gray area with trauma. Trauma is either going to make you resilient or it's going to take you down a dark path and it's going to blind you a lot. That's my opinion. Now, if you decide not to deal with it, here's what tends to happen. You put it away in your subconscious mind. You don't think about it. You think you're over it. And what ends up happening is you start responding to your environment in an irrational way and you don't really know why, but it makes total sense to you. This is very similar to people who go into crowds and they start feeling panicky, like something's going to happen to them. Well, nothing's really happening, but in their mind, their disturbing memory that they experienced in the past that the mind is associating with that situation triggers that response. What ends up happening is they have to leave the environment that is causing that. Therefore, it makes their environment smaller. And then it makes it even smaller. And by the time you know it, the safe and calm place for them is in their home, in their room, and they have shut themselves out from really integrating with society at that point. That's the problem with trauma. It skews your perspective. It makes you react irrational, and it makes your world smaller. If you decide to deal with it, what ends up happening is you have to confront that fear. Hopefully it's in a professional environment with a mental health professional. And you have to step into it, learn from it, heal from it, and let it go. That's the key part. You have to let it go, not suppress, not detach. You learn from it, you recognize it, and you let it go. On the other end, what people end up doing is they detach, suppress, and they don't deal with it. They don't learn. The mind doesn't learn how to deal with that trauma. So it has it right here calculating for their environment that they're in. And it shouldn't be calculating. It's something that you needed to learn from it, process it, feel it, and let it go so it doesn't happen again. The mind is only trying to keep you alive. It's self-preserving. And so when you have a lot of trauma in your life, It's very selfish. It only thinks about you. It only thinks about surviving. It thinks about short term, and it thinks about comfort. So if you have a lot of trauma, chances are your world is very small and your discomfort levels are very sensitive to anything that is foreign to you or something that your world is probably a little bit smaller. And it'll get smaller and smaller like we talked about unless you deal with it. Not only will your world literally get smaller, but your perspective will also get smaller. You won't be able to have a diversified analysis of your environment. You'll want to have only your own perspective, especially when you're feeling uncomfortable. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today. Click like and subscribe to the content if you're enjoying it. It will really help the channel and I greatly appreciate it, okay? And remember, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people.